As weird as it might sound, you know what I think a lot of survival horror games are about? Love. Just think about it for a second. Silent Hill 2 is certainly about it, about how men commit violence against women under the guise of love. 2022's breakout indie hit Signalis is absolutely about love, with its protagonist trying to find it amongst the looming force of fascism. Alan Wake 2 is a wife guy simulator, Rule of Rose is a messed up crush simulator. Clearly there's a number of survival horror titles that deal with themes of love. When you think about love in media broadly, you'll probably be thinking about romantic love. You might jump to a 2000s era Matthew McConaughey-ass rom-com, easy breezy watching, very low stakes apart from that bit in the second act where things start to go wrong, but only predictably, safely wrong. You might also be thinking of it from a cis-heteronormative perspective too. Except love isn't as easy as rom-coms make it out to be, and it comes in all kinds of forms. It could be difficult because you have a complicated relationship with a family member, but still have love for them. Sometimes you have a lot of unpacking to do from previous romantic relationships, or inexperience in romantic relationships, and of course social and political dynamics like patriarchy, capitalism, racism, and all that impact our relationships. Oh yeah, that's right, love is political too, if you can believe it. Trauma and oppression, baby! It makes love hard. So, what happens when you have a survival horror game that deals with love being messy and uncomfortable, and also puts it in the spotlight? One that actually acknowledges what love is like in the real world, our world, how intense and uncomfortable it can be, how difficult that is to navigate amid structural violence and cranking that up to 11 by putting you into the depths of almost literal hell? Well, you get the visual feast that is Sorry We're Closed. Hi, my name's Fia and welcome to Game Assist's first review. Subscribers will generally best know us as a video essay channel, where we cover a broad range of topics across a variety of games. But typically our run times are on the long side. We've been talking behind the scenes about doing smaller, more digestible videos like reviews for a while now, and I want to take a second to run through our intention for them. By day, I'm a games journalist, and when I write a review, there's certain expectations I have to meet. Reviews have to be broadly informative, and at the worst of times, they are essentially just a quick document that tells you whether the reviewer thinks you should buy a game or not. That's all well and good from time to time, but not what we want to do here. Our intention for reviews at Game Assist is more specific. We might not mention everything you need to know about a game. We won't even necessarily tell you if we think a game is good or not, whatever that means. Instead, we're hoping to show you why a game is interesting, particularly from the point of view of political critique, even if it's rough around the edges. And we don't do review scores either. Unless, it'd be funny to do so according to some goofy metric. Bits always come above values. With all that out of the way, as a quick reminder, if you end up enjoying the video, please make sure to give it a like, and maybe even subscribe to our channel for more. If you really enjoy the video, you can also consider joining our Patreon for regular support, or shooting a Ko-fi donation our way as a one-off thing. Thanks for your time, onto the review. A lot of survival horror games often look a bit gritty and gruesome in the way they're designed, from lighting to texture work. Like if you were to smell them, you'd rather be sniffing straight sewage. This debut title from Alamode Games certainly has those vibes in places, but it's colourful as all hell too. There's maybe something to be said how aesthetic ideas around horror are changing a lot, like how Midsommar is incredibly bright and predominantly set in the daytime, using that to its advantage to invoke horror in a different way from the expected use of darkness or shadow. Or in the more recent and incredible The Substance, again quite a dazzlingly lit film, almost as if these big Hollywood lights are revealing something more sinister. Food for thought, and perhaps another essay. In Sorry We're Closed, you play as Michelle, whose age we don't know for sure, but who gives off a strong 20-something vibe. Michelle is still reeling from a breakup that took place years back, stuck in a corner shop job in some nameless London town she hates, with not much else going on. You know, the experience of literally every 20-something in late-stage capitalist London, except the ones that are actually doing the exploiting. One day, Michelle has a freaky dream where a paralysis monster known as the Duchess curses her, hoping to make her fall in love with them. You know, average lesbian stuff, this is why we need classes on flirting. And the Duchess drops Michelle into a world of angels and demons that are really bad at this whole dating thing. Sorry We're Closed ain't no dating sim, it's only the Duchess who's trying to seduce Michelle with their unwanted advances. But you do have to deal with other characters' relationship troubles too. Gameplay-wise, things will be pretty familiar to old head survival horror fans. There's fixed camera angles galore, with smooth controls that easily transition from one screen to the next. When you finally get into the meat and potatoes of it, there is of course some gunplay, though Sorry We're Closed takes a unique switch to first-person approach that we'll dig more into later. There's also a wider cast of characters filled with a few regular humans that also suck at romance, often asking you to fix their problems. This manifests as side quests almost. You'll be given tasks to complete by some of these cast members. It might be something as simple as taking a photo, or even just telling someone to do a specific thing, but sometimes there are conflicting requests, so it's up to you to decide how you want to proceed. All of this would be fine if your curse wasn't going to submit you to a life of torture and misery for the rest of eternity, and I'm not talking about being stuck on the Northern Line at rush hour, but it can open up some interesting doors later on. That curse does come with one bonus, a third eye, which lets you see between two different planes of existence. Visually, that presents itself as a small ring around you. It's an incredibly cool effect that lets you see the real world, as well as the world that demons typically see. Gameplay-wise, it's mostly there for some puzzles and seeing enemies' weak points, but narratively, we can interpret it as exploring ideas around seeing the truth. Let's focus on that second point for now, the narrative one, about seeing the truth. Much like in Silent Hill, Sorry We're Closed is divided up into a few different levels, predominantly taking place around where Michelle lives, all experienced over the course of about 3 days. The first locale you visit is your local tube station, which, thanks to your new curse, allows you to see into the world of demons. But if we're being honest, that really is just the underground on a day-to-day basis. You're not physically switching between worlds, you're almost looking into another dimension. Quite quickly you find that Michelle's best friend Robin is actually a horny demon. No, literally. She has a big old pair of horns, hooves, tail, BDSM wear. You know, that classic biblical look. You soon find out that this is how Robin looks to all otherworldly beings, be they demons or angels, and that her human visage, which is decidedly different from that horned demon BDSM look, is how she appears to all humans, including Michelle prior to her curse. It's definitely a real "we're not in Kansas anymore" Toto kind of moment. The perception of reality Michelle had is gone now, and I find it particularly interesting that something like a tube station is used to introduce us to that change, in part because of how it functions as a space, but also because of the ways people treat others in the real world, our world's London Underground. I myself am non-binary, but most of the time I wouldn't necessarily say I presented particularly gender non-conforming. Androgyny isn't something I'm interested in, especially not as a fat person as well, though I would like to maybe wear makeup more, or wear my hair in more typically feminine styles occasionally. And the reason I don't is, well, people. Anyone that's taken enough trips on the London Underground knows how likely you are to be accosted for even the most innocuous of reasons. Because you're almost trapped there. It's a liminal space, one that you have to use sometimes to get from A to B. And that means being around people that at best might just give you a nasty look, and at worst could harass or even assault you. The risk of violence is in the air like noxious gas, and the anxiety, which can be as extreme as fear for your life, weighs on your chest as heavy as the suitcase you're lugging with you. Damn inaccessible tube stations. Only when you emerge above the surface can you breathe again, if only for a moment. The threat of violence isn't gone, but at least it's easier to escape up here. Sorry We're Closed's nightmare world version of a tube station isn't filled with people that seek to do either of those things, but I think the presence of demons, specifically demons whose sole gameplay function is to kill you, feels like a parallel to the experience of having to travel on the tube as a gender non-conforming person, with the risk of patriarchal, gender-based violence that being recognised as a gender non-conforming person in a public space can expose you to. You can do your best to avoid these enemies, duking them in a classic survival horror fashion, but as is typical of the genre, you often have to backtrack through places you've already been, so you're just putting off the problem for later. New enemies can spawn later on too, and some are harder to kill than others. No matter what, you'll eventually be forced into some kind of confrontation. It's stressful, not least because combat isn't exactly the smoothest of experiences. Unlike its Silent Hill and Resident Evil inspirations, where you just mostly spin around to aim, Sorry We're Closed has you switch into a first-person perspective. With a mouse, aiming isn't too much of a pain, but I'm not really much of a keyboard player, so I use a controller, which felt a lot clunkier. Both modes of playing had an awkwardness to them though. Switching between third and first person isn't as instant as you might like, which might feel a little frustrating at first, but I also think that kind of classic PS1 jankiness creates attention too. It's pretty easy to die in this game if you're not careful, and you can't save whenever you want, so at times that jank works in its favour. I often felt panicked when enemies would get close to me. It genuinely kind of stressed me out because I had no real options to protect myself easily. If I wasn't quick to defend myself, I'd get hit. Bringing us back to that parallel of real-world harassment in a tube station, these moments felt akin to being harassed in that particular public space. Sudden, invasive, and much too close for comfort, as well as feeling ill-equipped to defend yourself, maybe totally unarmed or armed only with a pair of keys, completely surrounded and with no help or way to escape that claustrophobic underground tunnel. I think despite Michelle being a woman, there is a gender non-conforming vibe to her appearance. Arguably there's a masculinity to her in ways. That mullet, for example, a haircut more typically viewed as a masculine one, but one that more and more queer women have been adopting in recent years. Her sense of fashion feels like it doesn't want to stick to gender norms too. Not necessarily because it's butch, but because of its colourful hyperfemininity, which draws attention in contrast to normative femininity's expectation of plain colours and plain makeup, a natural feminine look that makes you look like everyone else. Michelle's big "I just murdered my rich husband" fur coat alone can make anyone stand out in a cis-normative world that rewards you for dressing plainly and blending into the crowd. So I think having to walk around these demon-filled hellscapes as a parallel to just trying to go about your daily life as a visibly gender non-conforming person while trying to avoid being hate-crimed feels apt. Being queer, or more specifically being visibly queer, or perceived as queer in a violent cis-hetero-patriarchal world, can be this absolutely terrifying thing because of the way it exposes you to the threat of violence. Just doing pretty simple life things like taking a train ride or walking around an aquarium can be dangerous if you could be perceived as queer, whether you are or not, whatever form that noticeable gender nonconformity that makes you stand out among the crowd might take. My favourite kind of horror is the kind that makes me feel like I'm eating a Marmite. You know, like when you're just fucking lathering up a piece of toast that could kill a European in one bite, and it makes you go, oh, I put a bit too much on there! But when the discomfort subsides, you're just left with a mouth of umami? That kind. As horrible as the feeling can be, I also love it when something just makes me squeal with anxiety. Maybe I'm just a freak, because yeah, it can be uncomfortable, but the catharsis that can come afterwards is just a bit unexplainable to someone that doesn't get it. Like Marmite, you love it or you hate it, you know? I get that it's not for everyone. Horror just gets me to reflect on things in a way a lot of other genres don't. It pushes me to try and figure out why I'm uncomfortable with the thing I'm looking at, the thing I'm experiencing. And I think Sorry We're Closed, pairing that up with a theme like love, queer love in particular, feels really fresh and bold. Boundaries are a pretty integral part of building and maintaining healthy relationships with yourself and with others, which can be the opposite of what the world tells us. Marginalised people like women, people of colour, and working class people are expected to roll over and have personal boundaries violated all the time, which is part of how we're oppressed, and interpersonally, psychologically, and structurally worn down. But understanding how to resist this and to learn to use boundaries to strengthen ourselves and our communities can be a powerful tool for our long-term resistance. In Sorry We're Closed, it's up to you as the player to figure out how Michelle wants to establish and exercise her boundaries. Mechanically, this crops up in quite a simple manner, as there are a number of occasions where you'll be provided with dialogue options, allowing you to decide how you want to progress down the main story and side quests. These decisions can block you off from finishing certain side quests, though this does have a counter effect of sometimes improving or worsening certain relationships, putting Michelle in the position where she's demonstrating autonomy through the actions of the player. We'll get to this in a moment, but it also affects what endings you can get, and in turn the path Michelle ends up on in life. The first person to really cross Michelle's boundaries, by quite literally entering her home, dream or not, is the Duchess, that sleep paralysis demon I mentioned earlier. The Duchess is overwhelming in every sense of the word. They're tall, demanding, close to all-powerful. They want Michelle's love even if she doesn't want to give it, and perhaps scariest of all, they're gorgeous. Beauty is often an intimidating thing, especially if we understand it as a political construct, which is arbitrary and gives and takes away power. There's an assumed confidence that comes with it, and boy howdy is the Duchess full of that. Horror itself is a genre that intentionally pushes boundaries, and I find it fascinating that Sorry We're Closed puts romantic relationships through that lens. It feels like it asks us to look at our own relationships, and the things we ask and demand of each other, and whether we're doing the right thing or not. In the case of the Duchess, it doesn't seem like they're doing the right thing, as the game makes it clear that all they really end up doing is torturing their love interests. Yeah, sure, there's one character, a literal massive eyesore, that revels in being tortured by the Duchess. Go off, Queen. But it doesn't appear to be healthy. Maybe don't go off, Queen. Relationships should be about healthy balances, and it seems the Duchess doesn't know how to manage that. This inability to have a healthy balance in a relationship feels like a too often unspoken thing within a number of queer communities too. I think certain people, looking at you fellow white queer people, can perhaps think that it's impossible to do wrong because of their queerness, when really they just simply haven't put the work into understanding that they are capable of doing harm, no matter their marginalisation. Now, this isn't to say these kinds of people or the Duchess aren't deserving of love, but there's still important questions to ask about how we treat each other. Perhaps the Duchess and people like them are replicating something that our patriarchal society has taught them, which is to treat women as objects that have no sense of self, dislikes or boundaries. Maybe then, Sorry We're Closed is asking queer people to consider the actions they take in their relationships, and if they have some work to do so we can actually move towards a progressive society? Just spitballing here. With the Duchess acting as they do, it makes it impossible to feel like Michelle could ever be safe in a relationship with someone like them. After all, aren't relationships of all kinds meant to feel safe? Sorry We're Closed very successfully plays into the discomfort of having one's boundaries be crossed, and had me thinking about the kind of choices I would make in such a scenario. It's important to note here that Sorry We're Closed has multiple endings, so this idea around choice is an important one. You can't unlock them all in one playthrough, and I won't spoil them, but I do think it's interesting how you get to some of them. One is just the default ending, the ending you get if you don't really do much at all. But there are a couple that are only unlockable if you complete tasks assigned by particular characters, those side quests I mentioned earlier. Like in any game with side quests, it's very much up to you if you want to do them or not. The characters might exert pressure on you, because they have their own wants and needs, but materially within the world of the game, not listening to them doesn't have a direct effect on what you can or can't do, but it does affect which endings you can get. Arguably, this implies that investing time into personal relationships with certain characters, whatever your motivation, is something which does impact your fate, one way or another. Sorry We're Closed handles endings differently than something like Silent Hill 2, where even just not healing yourself or simply looking at a particular photo can affect what ending you get without you even realising it. Sorry We're Closed offers you a choice quite directly. Before the last section of the game, you're placed into a room with 4 doorways in front of you. Depending on which side quest you've completed, different characters will appear in front of the doors, and from then you can go up to any of them and choose who you want to go with. At first I wasn't really sure what to make of the fact you can just choose your ending. I think there's an argument to be made that it's a bit ham-fisted. Maybe there's even less grace to it than the way some other games handle multiple endings. And to some players it might still come across that way. Flashbacks to Mass Effect 3's ending controversy. But I think the game deserves more credit than that, because there's a power in choice. All of the characters you meet have such varying and contrasting personalities, and it feels like the individual player could quite easily latch onto any of them depending on their preferences. Clarissa is an angel with a bit of a mean streak, but she's funny and confident, and maybe you're sick of being nice too? Daryl is an idiot human who's nasty to everyone but his partner, though perhaps is worth putting in the time to help him be a better person. Chamuel is the angel of love, and ironically isn't in the healthiest of relationships, so do you try to find a solution or encourage him to move on? The game doesn't push you in a particular direction, it's very much up to you to make your own mind up on who you want to help or ignore. Except for maybe in the case of Lucy, a demon who I'm almost definitely sure is meant to be Lucifer given her name, who spends the entire game encouraging you to fulfill her requests because she can supposedly get you back with your ex, but come on, that's a bit suspicious, right? In the end, I didn't end up choosing Lucy's ending because, well, it just didn't feel right. If there's one thing most of us have probably learned by now, regardless of whether we had formal religious education or a pop culture one, surely it's that the devil in your ear promising you what you want, which might not be what you need, can't be trusted, right? I didn't want Michelle to be so fixated on one single person because she has so many friends she's gotten closer to over the course of the game. Why shouldn't platonic love be considered as valuable as romantic love? Especially when the platonic bonds built by Michelle are clearly healthier and more nourishing than the romantic ones left behind. I think, at least in the ending I got, Sorry We're Closed opens up this possibility of smashing the hierarchy between platonic and romantic love. And despite not being a completely forward-facing presence in the game, I think it's in part because of one particular thing. Our good old pal, capitalism. As mentioned earlier, Michelle works in a corner shop, and she's not particularly fond of it. It pays the bills, yeah, sure, but just managing to pay the bills isn't a good life, is it? The word capitalism isn't used in the game, but we don't need to name it to feel its presence there, gnawing at the back of your mind like a boss convinced the money they'll lose from you for getting to charge someone for a packet of gum is somehow the difference between them only owning 2 homes abroad, when they could own 3. The focus is even there from the name of the game alone, which references the corner shop. Sorry, we're closed. You don't even spend all that much time in the corner shop. It's not somewhere you can walk around. It's just used for cutscenes. And yet it's always there, right underneath the flat you live in, always waiting for you to start your shift and return to eternal, cyclical, hellish torment. And I think that's part of why Michelle wants to get back with her ex. Relationships, when they're good and healthy anyway, should theoretically bring a sense of safety and comfort. And I think our culture tells us that romantic relationships should make you feel that way doubly so. Crucially, this can be seen as a palliative to capitalism. Yeah, you're miserable in your service job, but why try to build bonds with your workers and unionise, organise for better working conditions, and so on, when you can go home to your romantic partner and just escape it all for a while? Capitalism wants romantic love to serve as a potential balm or band-aid, never encouraging us to work towards community building, collective organising, and dismantling the status quo. Unhealthy relationships can have a sense of familiarity to them, even if it's not a welcome kind, and the what-ifs of trying to get out of a bad one, what if they hate me, what if they hurt me, can be scarier than being in it. So I think Michelle goes in search of getting back with her ex to find a sense of, if not safety, the familiarity and stability her precarious life under capitalism doesn't offer her, in addition to the promise of escape. At one point the shop she works in even gets smashed up and she gets blamed for it and loses her job. The responsibility of her workplace's safety isn't on her, but it's placed on her, rendered an individual problem, which she's responsible for as an employee, rather than something that the institution is responsible for, and she's put in a shit position because of it. It's here where Sorry We're Closed feels so appropriate as a horror, and where the best horror comes from. It represents very real, personal and political fears of actual material dangers under capitalism and cis-heteropatriarchy, losing your job, being alone, no one loving you, being hate-crimed in public, by blending them with hyperbolic, metaphorical fears of actual demons coming to hurt you. You, the player, are already on edge from having to take on monsters, and that's amped up to 11 while you try to balance this with Michelle's normal life. It is scary to be alone, I hate it myself, but romantic relationships aren't the be-all and end-all of life. They certainly don't solve the structural problems that connected to our loneliness. How capitalism wears us down and alienates us from each other. How cis-heteropatriarchy exposes us to violence and abuse. There is value in building a strong support network, of valuing and prioritising other forms of love. We can see coming together and trying to beat the odds, solidarity and organising, as a kind of love in itself. Whether the enemy we work to overcome is an overwhelmingly powerful demon or a shitty boss. In the ending I got, Michelle found herself much closer with characters like Robin. She bonded with Robin's partner, Benedict, and helped Daryl become a marginally better person, as well as a better partner. In this ending, she's refused to let the forces that be, ethereal beings and corporate overlords, stop her from finding and building connections elsewhere. That isn't to say I think Sorry We're Closed outright solves any of these issues. Yes, in this ending, Michelle has tightened the relationships that matter to her most, but her life is still far from perfect. She does just wind up back in that corner shop again. This isn't a bad thing though. I think if Sorry We're Closed were to provide one definitive answer as to how you can find a better life for yourself and others, it would be a less interesting game. You'll definitely be left with questions, because to be perfectly honest, in a way all of the endings are a little bit anticlimactic. After you beat the final boss, no matter what, you do just end up going back to the same old. It's more powerful to leave the player with questions, I think, to get them to think deeper about their own relationships, how they want to express love. The game clearly creates the space for us to raise the questions we have about love, that there are reasons capitalism and patriarchy want us to prioritise romantic love over other forms of love, to keep us subjugated, and that community building and solidarity can be considered as important and revolutionary forms of love. For me, Sorry We're Closed is saying love can go further and be interpreted differently than the way structures of society says it can. You can sow the seeds of a different life, and I find that better than the often pessimistic endings that horror games have. Perhaps capitalism and patriarchy are the real horrors that we survive. It's just what comes after that's up to you. Thanks so much for watching Gamers' first video of 2025 and our first review. We have a few things cooking in the background at the moment and plan to bring you more reviews and essays throughout the year. As a little reminder, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like, and maybe even subscribe. We're super close to 2,000 subscribers, so feel free to tell a friend about us, or like a surprisingly progressive aunt. And if you want to support us even further, we have a Ko-fi for one-off donations and Patreon for longer term support. Thanks for watching.